Good morning to you. And Rashmi and Brad, thank you for joining. We'll start in probably about 3 minutes. We're live streaming and we're on your local news. You can switch to channel 4.
Alternatively, if you have a Candu account, you can actually see us streaming live from the dashboard.
Yes, that is true.
Pretty cool.
We're doing that through Twitch and we're doing it using Candu, which is pretty cool. So it's a concept we eventually want to take more advantage of, where we're constantly streaming live content and we're showing it inside of the dashboard. It'll be like a QVC for SaaS products. Georgia, I was thinking that we should not do any handover. You'll just control your screen the whole time. So you'll share intercom. Could everyone message where they are watching from? Yep. Welcome all the new people who just joined. I'd love to know where you're all watching this from. Chicago, Brad, India. I'm currently in South India. I'm in Kerala right now. My wife's from Kerala, so I'll be back to New York in a couple of weeks. Pittsburgh, study in Pittsburgh. We'll wait probably another minute. Have a couple more people trickling in. Grab a refreshment. This is meant to be entertaining. Jonathan's just joined us.
Hello.
All right. It is, 9:01 a.m. on the West Coast. So I think probably, given that we only have 30 minutes, time to get going. We'll also be recording this. So if you miss any bits and you want to come back and see our introduction, feel free. By way of introduction, I'm Georgia. I'm the head of customer here at Candu, and I'm joined by Adam, our head of product marketing. And today we thought we'd do a session on user onboarding, something that we spend a ton of time and we wanted to share some of the insights that we've sort of gleaned with all of you. We also really want it to be an interactive session. So if you have comments or stories that have come out in your life of doing user onboarding, we'd love if you would share those in the chat, and one of us will be trying to monitor it and share those as we go along.
Yep. And this is meant to be an interactive webinar. So really, please feel free to interject at any point in time and we'll respond. Are we recording? Just sorry to interrupt you. I'm already interjecting. I'm so sorry.
It says we're live.
We're live, I think streaming, but can you just double check that we're recording?
Oh, yes, it looks like it.
Yeah. Okay. Does it say host? Ask permission for host to record?
No.
No.
We're actually going to spend, I would say, the majority of the session doing an onboarding best practices discussion. So we'll actually talk about how we think about onboarding, how we built our user onboarding, and we're going to take a look at some examples that we think are sort of best in class examples while talking about how you can sort of make that relevant to you. So I would say that will probably be about 2/3 of the discussion today. And then towards the end of the session, a lot of what we're talking about is making onboarding dynamic and personalized and all of these things. And so we'll spend about 5 to 7 minutes walking through Candu, our product that helps you do dynamic onboarding, how you can use it to build your own sort of version of intercoms checklist, which we consider one of the best in the business. And then, of course, like we said, please interject anytime, but we will leave about 5 minutes at the end for wrap up and Q&A. So if you're shy and want to wait until that point, you're totally welcome. But again, please comment anytime. Without further ado, we actually wanted to start with one of the things that I think is so cool about user onboarding is that I think a lot of the time, because a developer builds it and you sort of get one shot at it, people sort of think of it as important, but not something that you spend a ton of time thinking about every day. Hopefully all of you are different than that since you're in this session, but user onboarding is actually really cool because it pulls in all kinds of different principles of, for instance, we're about to talk about psychology. I think design thinking is a really big part of user onboarding, iterating, education, user customer success. All of these things are a part of your user onboarding. And so I think it's actually a great topic that covers actually many different areas. So Adam has some cool psych studies to share about this.
Yeah, I thought I'd start off. Thanks a lot, Georgia. Wanted to start off with a little story. Thought was interesting as I was doing some more research on the psychology of checklists. And it starts out with a young psychology PhD student. Her name was Bluma Ziegernick. That's where this name comes from, who was studying in University of Berlin. And the inspiration for her postdoctoral research came from an experience sitting at a restaurant and observing that waiters would do a phenomenal job recalling all of the orders that they had taken that were not yet served, but did a terrible job at remembering what were the orders that had already been served. And so what she came to discover through some clinical tests was that there is a bias with human memory that we remember things that we haven't yet completed better than things that we have already completed. And so this cognitive bias, known as this Zeigarnik effect, excuse me for my poor Lithuanian pronunciation, is used in many different mediums. And you're probably most familiar with it from cliffhangers in storytelling. So say screenwriters of TV programs are leveraging the Zeigarnik effect by creating an expectation of something in the future. And so that leaves this excitement and draw for people to keep remembering to look forward to the next episode. And so this same effect is also used psychology, or this psychological principle is also used in designing checklists. So Georgia, also, I thought we could also talk a little bit about some of the other principles of good checklist design.
Yeah, I think one of the really cool things about thinking about this effect is that checklists actually serve a number of different purposes when you're thinking about user onboarding. So if people are better at remembering the things they still have to do, the checklist encourages them to have some sense of what's left for them. But it also, the nice thing is that typically the first things that they've already accomplished don't just disappear when you complete a checklist step. So it keeps you sort of top of mind of what you've already accomplished. And I think, Adam, you had actually another psychological principle that checklists fulfill, which is both our need to complete things and our motivation to complete things increases as we get closer to finishing something. So
that's right, Georgia. It is called the goal gradient effect. And you were telling me a story yesterday. You have this when you go running.
I train for marathons. And so I usually will set a goal for myself for how many miles I should run in a week. And if I have left too many to the last couple of days of the weekend, then there's a much higher likelihood of me missing, where if I need to run 2 miles on Sunday to hit my goal, I'm pretty likely to do it because it just feels like it would be a shame not to hit that. And I'm sure everyone has sort of examples of this in life. When you make a super long to-do list, this is why they often tell you to sort of focus on the 3 top things that you need to accomplish in a day. When you have a really long to-do list, you're more likely to actually be demotivated by the sense that you can't accomplish it all. And so keeping a short to-do list of really focused patterns so you feel like you can actually reach the end of it is important. And it's also important to make sure those to-dos are sort of bite-sized and accomplishable. I don't know if you've ever made a to-do list where one of the things is like change the world. That's probably going to be a little bit harder to motivate to do. It's good to have concrete tasks that you can actually check off. There's something about getting it done that really makes a difference to people.
Yeah. Also, Georgia, I thought I'd share a couple of things I was reading about best practices when it comes to checklist design. And then what are the kind of principles that checklists tap into to help people in completing them more quickly, because this topic is all about onboarding, right? So everybody is already familiar with checklists, right? So I won't delve too deep into things, but I think one reason why checklists are so effective is that they're familiar, right? And humans just have a cognitive bias towards familiar things. And so that's why they call this a UI pattern. And Georgia, I was reading a little bit about UI patterns, and you could say a lot of things that we're familiar with in the software design world, like say a shopping cart, right? We're familiar with that, at least in Western cultures. Shopping cart indicates this is like a basket of items that you're going to check out with. And so a checklist is also leveraging that familiarity. And so there's other elements, and without going into detail, the benefit of a checklist is that it introduces clarity. You're taking complex things and you're distilling them into individual steps. And it also leverages this sense of accomplishment and reward as you get through the checklist. And then I thought I'd share one tactic, and you brought this up, and this relates to this concept of the goal gradient effect, which is, again, to repeat, the goal gradient effect is this concept where the closer you are to completing the overall activity, the more motivated you are to finish it. And so one of the tips and tricks that UX designers take advantage of is when somebody is being onboarded, get them, before they even see the checklist, to do some type of small activity. So it could be maybe uploading an image, right? So you upload your logo, and then they see the checklist, and some of the steps of the checklist are already ticked off. Georgia, that's super effective in getting people motivated to complete the checklist.
Yeah, I've often seen in some it'll just say like simply the first step will be log in. And so by the time you're even seeing the checklist, you will have already been logged in. So you'll automatically have one step checked off already. And I think that gives people that sort of sense that they're making progress, they're moving through it, and things are happening automatically as they're getting going and that they can achieve the thing that they want to get done. So when you're thinking about building your own checklist, I think we're going to look at some best in class checklists today, but every business is going to have obviously their own onboarding checklist that they need to think about. I'm sure a lot of you probably already have an onboarding checklist, but I think onboard is actually a pretty dynamic thing. It will change with your product. It will change with the user feedback you hear. It changes a lot and you should not set it and forget it. You should be constantly thinking about how you can sort of build a better first experience with your product. And so some of the ways that we think about this at Candu are the first thing you need to do is define your aha moment. And I think some people, especially those of us who work with a product all the time, it's really easy to want to share everything that your product can do, especially if you're sort of trying to onboard everybody with the same checklist or the same onboarding flow. And so you want to share all of the different value props that your company has. And I think anyone in sales will tell you that this is not a good strategy. This overwhelms people. Again, it makes people feel like they can't complete the checklist or they're not finding their value. So honing in on that one thing that will make people feel comfortable with your product, feel like they know what they're doing, and then start thinking about getting deeper is really important. So once you've defined that, I think you know how you'd get to it. You use your product all the time. You have a sense of what those steps are. The next thing you need to do is actually think about, okay, as a non-employee, as someone who's never interacted with this software before, I was just like a human being, how do I think about how I start using this and getting to value? And a big part of that is actually, like I was saying, we've got our psych principles. We also, I think, user onboarding should really leverage these concepts of design thinking. So I think design thinking is becoming quite trendy now. So I'm sure a lot of you have spent some time with it, but the idea is really, how do you build empathy with your users and how do you iterate really quickly based on user feedback? You know, we always think we know other people really well. And then in this world of data-driven analysis, we've learned that a lot of our assumptions are often wrong, and design thinking really does plug into that. But when you're starting out, when you're first thinking about building your onboarding, I think it's really helpful. Here's an example right here of a design thinking practice with going to the movie theater. And the idea is sort of you start. Yeah.
I think this is called a user journey map.
Yeah, it's a core part of the early stage of a design thinking process before you're actually working with your users. So you'll actually nominate a persona, get someone who you think epitomizes your users or is a typical user, and you try to give them some personality traits and talk about what they're trying to accomplish. So in your case, it would be getting to that aha moment or first onboarding with your software. You think about maybe what their expectations are coming in, and then you break down sort of the stages that they're going to go through, the actions that they're going to take. And then the really important part is sort of mapping out this emotional journey that they're going to go through. So what are the highs? What are places where you've seen people really light up and get excited about your software? What are the lows where people get sort of often get frustrated and stymied or might have questions? So like in this movie theater example, if I were a movie theater, I'm looking at this, where's my car is something that people have confusion about. So if I'm trying to like optimize my movie theater experience, maybe something I think about is whether it's valet parking or some other way to help people find their cars faster so that when they leave, their last taste of their movie theater experience isn't a negative. You don't want people tend to remember the end of their experience best. So you want to make sure that having a good experience all the way through and accounting for all these little things that maybe you wouldn't normally think about.
Right.
And then the last
Makes
thing
sense.
I would note, along with empathizing with your users, figuring out your aha moment, today's presentation, we're going to spend a lot of time on sort of these self-serve onboarding checklists. But I think onboarding checklists are also very helpful if you have a customer success first model. So sometimes when I'm working with our customers, I talk to them directly, but we'll make up a task list for the next week in which I won't be talking to them for another week or 2 weeks. There's a self-serve onboarding checklist, that the goal of which is to get someone through without talking to another person. But even if you are running a SaaS org that leverages customer success, the onboarding checklist can still be a really great way to sort of keep touch points with your users and keep them accountable between meetings. So you use a checklist if you're not talking to them, and you don't use it if you are. There's a lot of different ways you can think about this, but thinking about your model is really helpful in terms of how you structure this checklist.
Makes sense. Yeah. So you've got self-serve, self-guided, as well as assisted onboarding. And
Yeah,
Georgia, I thought we
exactly.
could take a look at Intercom real quick. I imagine most people would be familiar with Intercom. They're a very popular live chat software. So they're used by hundreds of thousands of businesses worldwide. And inside their dashboard, they have a comprehensive checklist. And this has been extremely successful to their growth because they are, for the most part, a self-serve software, and they have literally hundreds of thousands of users. So I thought Georgia had shared just a couple of things that I really like about the Intercom checklist. So, this guy, Phil, actually, I found out he's not a product manager. I was like, Phil, you did a great job, but actually he's a customer success person. I imagine you collaborated with a PM. So the first thing I noticed off the bat is this is broken down by kind of first order requirements. Here's your quick start guide. And then Georgia, if you scroll down a little bit, you can show everybody watching that there's these sort of more advanced features. So what they've done is they've clustered a group of these most necessary steps that you need to do to get up and running with Intercom. And they've kept that separate. The other thing I wanted to mention is this is actually only 3 steps. So you're already initially motivated because, oh, I only have 3 things to do to get started. Then it's nested. So you actually discover that there's more steps, but when you first approach it, it's setting an expectation that this is very doable. Anything you wanted to point out, Georgia, that you particularly like?
So I think a couple of really interesting things that Intercom does is, one, Intercom's kind of a pop-up chat tool, but they decided to actually put their onboarding checklist on a page that you can always come back to. And so one of the nice things about that is that there's not that sense that your onboarding checklist might disappear or might not be there if you don't get through all the steps in one sitting. You can always come back and sort of update your branding or whatever it is that you want to do. You can do a lot of that by just coming back to this homepage. So that was one thing I think is really interesting that they do. Another thing that I think as a company, you need to sort of make these decisions, but Intercom made a couple of interesting decisions in my mind. The first is that it has an entire get to know Intercom section that starts out with a video introducing the product. So they're coming in with the assumption, and I think this makes sense because they have such a self-serve model, but they're coming in with the assumption that you might not have full context on what you're doing when you're setting it up, that you might not have spent tons of time with their marketing materials. If you have a brand where you're more likely to talk to a salesperson first, or if you have a brand where you have one admin who's going to be doing a lot of the setup, then this might not be necessary, and it would be a way to take out a step. So you could lower the cognitive load of how many steps someone needs to go through to get done. But to Adam's point, this is also a really nice way to let someone check something off right away. With this first step, all you have to do is watch a video and hit get started, and you already have checked off a step. So there's sort of pros and cons to the ways that you think about that. Another really interesting thing that Intercom did is that they've mixed and matched. Intercom is a software that you probably need a developer to maybe install a single snippet for you. So different users might be working through the same checklist together at an account. And that's sort of what we call an account-based checklist, or where multiple people can come in and accomplish different steps. For some people, I think that makes a ton of sense. For others, it might be weird to have a handoff process right in the middle of your checklist. These are the kinds of things that you should be thinking about as you're building out your own onboarding.
Yeah, makes sense. Those are good insights, Georgia. Should
Cool.
we talk about a little bit about Candu for those folks? You're like, what the heck are these 2 people doing?
Yeah, so we'll jump back into slides for 1 second, and then we'll do something fun and interactive. So let's talk about what Candu. It's a really simple concept. The idea is it's just a drag and drop editor that I can use as a non-developer, Adam can use as a non-developer, where you can build little UI components like a checklist within our editor and set it up to match your branding. And then sort of almost like Intercom, you just install a snippet, but instead of being like a chatbot, it would actually be a section of your page. It's like a little website builder, but it can live within, let's say, the homepage of your SaaS application. And the cool thing about this is that now, instead of needing to come up with a perfect onboarding experience because your developer is building it and is not going to come back to it for whatever, a quarter, 2 quarters, a couple of years.
And they're done that.
We've all been there. We've all had onboarding that had screenshots from an old UI because we didn't get around to updating it. We don't think you need to live in that world anymore. And so with Candu, as a non-developer, once it's installed, go and update it anytime. You can also do something really cool, which is that you can take a home screen or whatever screen where you install Candu and do segmentation and customization. So an onboarding checklist is awesome if you are just getting started. It is very annoying if you are a deep admin who has great knowledge of the product and have already completed your checklist. You don't need to see it anymore. And maybe you're interested in actually getting deeper in the product, or, you know, Adam does product marketing. Maybe you want, as a product marketer, to share new updates so people who are interested in certain feature requests can see those right away when they come out. And with Candu, you can actually take the same space and provide different messaging to different user segments depending on who they are and what they're interested in.